Hello, everyone. This is Lori-Ann Smith. This is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, the continuation. And we're just looking at the Survivor to Thriver manual and looking at the beginning section called Safety First. And we're just continuing on in that. I'm glad to be here, glad to be able to do these videos. Hopefully they're helpful for you. If you're a survivor of abuse, if you haven't seen them before, they're free. This manual is free to download. And you can get it from www.ascasupport.org, or just type into your browser ASCA Adult Survivors of Child Abuse, and it'll come up. And it's the Survivor to Thriver manual. So that's what we're looking at. It's free to download. You can read it online if you don't want to download it. If you want an actual physical copy, they charge a few dollars for that because for the printing and the collating and the paper and all that. But they'll even get you a copy, a real hard copy if you want one. But they're free to use, and as long as we don't change the wording and attribute it to them, we're free to look at it and use it. So I'm glad to be here. We'll continue on, and I've got a bit of a cold, so hopefully you can hear me sort of mumbling, but I caught a bit of a cold. It's minus 40 out there right now with the wind chill. Our winter finally came, and somehow I caught a cold. I wasn't even out running around to catch a cold, so I don't know where it came from. But it's all good. We'll just continue on here. And I'm reading from, we're going to look at resolving abusive relationships first. Now, this is part of the safety first section. We already went and assessed different things, like we assessed our support network, building our support network system. That's what we went through last time. And, creating your plan for safety first. Awareness, assessment, action. So we did that on the last show. I just call them shows because I used to do blog talk radio shows, so I'm kind of still used to saying that. And but the last video, you can go check that out if you want to. Then there's the next section up is resolving abusive relationships first, and it's on page 25. And this is really important, all this stuff. This is part of the safety first, to make sure that a person is safe enough to do this work. Going through the Survivor to Thriver manual. As a survivor of child abuse, when I first started doing this work, I actually read this chapter, and I was like, unaware, that you don't want to be triggered. You don't want to go backward in your healing journey. So that's why safety first is really important. If you haven't been on your healing journey very long and you're a survivor of abuse and you're just starting out, these things can trigger you, and they can cause you to, have a horrible day. You don't want to do that. So that's why the safety first section is just really important. And so that's why we're going through this, so that you can sort of give you an idea of, what it's all about, sort of thing. And I'm actually setting up a group or two. I've actually got 3 in the works right now. One with SIA, the Survivors of Incest Anonymous, and that's for CSA Child Sexual Abuse and Incest. And then I've got an ASCA group going now that's just started back up. And whatever you choose to do, whatever is right for you, that's what you should do. And, group support for me was the way to go. But for some people, they'd rather just do a one-on-one with a therapist or a counselor. And that's great. You know what I mean? Like whatever works for you. So, because we're all different, right? And what works for me may not work for somebody else. What works for somebody else doesn't work for me. We have to find out what works for us and see if it's actually going to help us to get through this stuff, right? So the section here we're reading from right now is called Resolving Abusive Relationships First. And they said, I'm just reading right from their Survivor to Thriver manual. They said, many adult survivors find themselves in relationships that in some way parallel or resemble their childhood abuse scenarios. In some cases, these relationships are actually abusive, if not physically or sexually, then emotionally. Spousal or partner abuse is another behavior linked to childhood abuse. And the psychological or emotional impact of spousal abuse on the survivor can be every bit as devastating as the physical harm, because it reinforces and reinstates the sense of fear, threat, and personal devaluation that the childhood abuse originally created. So many survivors are inclined to deny the abusive nature of their adult relationships, much as they once denied their childhood abuse. So they said, if you have ever acknowledged or resolved your childhood abuse, you stand a surprisingly high chance of unconsciously repeating it. fully or partially, with a partner, spouse, or friend. Research tells us that abuse survivors are subject to as much as 5 times the risk of future victimization as are persons who were not abused. In addition to creating problems in your current relationships and even presenting the threat of physical harm, this denial can seriously undermine your recovery. And it's just so true. I mean, I've seen this myself just in my own family. My mom was abused as a child by her mother, and horrifically, like physical abuse, emotional, psychological, verbal abuse. My grandmother, I don't know whether she was abused or not, but she abused her children. And so my mom grew up abused, and then she married my dad, who then abused her, their whole marriage. And my mom just felt like that was her life. She just gave up. And so many times, this is what happens to abuse survivors. People who were abused as children then go into these relationships without even realizing they're abusive, and you know they don't recognize the signs, the flags, the red flags that should go up, and get into these relationships, and then they're abused as adults as well. So not only are they abused as children, but then they're abused as adults. And this is why it's so important to, start taking inventory of your life, and are people abusing you, as an adult? Coming from, being abused as a child, there wasn't, children can't protect themselves. So, you come through that and you actually live and make it. And then you end up in an abusive situation in your adult life. That's no good. This is why it's just so important, like, to get help. It really is. My mom had the opportunity to get help. She both my parents did, and they turned it down, and just continued to live that lifestyle, which is horrible. And I always wish they would have got help. It's a sad, sad thing. So they said part of your safety first plan is to assess whether your current personal relationships are abusive. If you determine that your personal relationships are abusive, then you will need to resolve them before initiating your recovery. This issue can be very complicated because in some cases, your expectations for relationships, which are shaped in part by your childhood abuse, can affect your perceptions of how people treat you. So in other words, what you expect to happen to you in your relationships can play as important a part in your perceptions as what actually happens to you in your relationship. Support your overall recovery goals, not to destroy your current efforts or reinforce past childhood abuse patterns. Remember that the whole idea behind Safety First is to be able to work on your recovery from a position of strength that results from having eliminated the fears associated with the abuse. And since recovery is a most challenging task, you need all the help and support you can get. And this includes making sure that your personal relationships do not replicate old abuse patterns. And they've got a personal relations checklist here. They said following is a personal relationships checklist. Use it to assess the degree of support and safety provided by your personal relationships. You can also use the checklist for work relationships, although these tend not to have as much impact on your sense of safety, in part because of the more structured and usually restricted nature of the workplace. So we can do a little checklist to see if how our relationships are right now. And this is just so, it is very important because I know for myself, I grew up abused. So from birth, so I didn't recognize a whole lot of stuff as a young adult, trying to go out and live in an adult world. And I had trust issues. I didn't trust anybody. And because I was abused by both my parents and a sibling. And so my relationships, I was always very leery of getting into any type of relationship, letting anybody get too close, because I feared more abuse, because I saw that my whole life, even with friends, all my family, and some friends, and just other people, just, knowing that this stuff, it's sadly enough, it's part of our world, right? And so I was leery about relationships anyway. And I had a difficult time with my first real relationship. The second one. The first one, like I said, became abusive, so we broke it off. But the second one wasn't abusive, but I actually thought he was going to abuse me, just automatically. That was just what was in my mind, because that's what I thought all relationships basically were. I had never seen I had seen some as a child, or even a young teen. Some of my friends' parents actually were not abusing each other, and I knew that. So I knew that there were people that that wouldn't hurt each other, and were good to each other, and that's all. Now that's always great. But I thought for me, I was so really petrified of allowing somebody to have that personal close space with me that they could hurt me. And so even though my relationship with Cecil, my husband who just passed away, in the beginning it was pretty rocky, but I was kind of expecting that he was going to abuse me. And I just thought I don't need any more abuse. And so I pushed him out, and I left the relationship after 1 year, and I left for a year. So we got back together the following year. So 3 years later, or whatever, 2 years. I just expected that that's the way it was going to be. That he was going to hurt me, and he was going to start hitting me or physically abusing me or whatever. And he wasn't. He had no intentions on doing that. So the thing is we can carry this stuff right on into adulthood. If we don't make the right choices for ourselves, we quite often end up in another abusive situation. So, with a partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, partner, any kind of relationship, friendships even can become abusive. If you don't have those boundaries set, which that's the real problem. With, our boundaries that were crossed when we were children, we don't even know. Growing up in an abusive, dysfunctional home, we may not understand or even know what a healthy boundary is. And so that's why it's so important to do boundary work and understand it and set those boundaries and decide exactly what you're going to tolerate, what you're not going to tolerate. I just said I'm not going to be abused anymore. I just spent my whole childhood and youth being abused. I was like, I'm not tolerating any more abuse, from anybody. So my boundaries are set. But for some survivors, they don't realize that they even need to set boundaries. They might feel like, well, I was abused by somebody, in the past, whoever it was, and but everybody else is safe. But that's just not the case. That's just not the case. I didn't trust anybody because both of my parents were right abusers, and I had seen a lot of other people abuse their children. I'd seen some good parents too, but I had also seen a lot of other abuse as well. And I just I really didn't trust people. No. I'm like, no, but then as I got older, I'm like, well, I want to build trusting relationships with people, but I want to find good people that I can trust. So that was my issue. And I was like, it was a definite trial grounds for me to try to navigate this, to understand boundaries and to set those boundaries and actually have them stick, So, and also to not, then we have to do the same and not hurt other people too, because everybody's capable of hurting somebody. The issue is, do we want to be that person? Not me, So I don't want anybody in my life abusing me, and I also don't want to be abusing anybody else. I think it's horrible. So that's why it's so important to set boundaries and just make sure that you have your boundaries defined, set up, right? In a way that they'll hold, and you're actually watching for these flags that come up, and you're like, no, I'm not going to tolerate abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, any type of abuse. It's just so important. So their checklist here for the personal relationship checklist, they say here, check yes or no to each question that applies. And that's, if you're answering this yourself, you would check these off. And I went through this book, like I said, I went through and did this myself many years ago. And the first question is, does your partner or spouse ever hit you? Yes or no? Second question, does your partner ever force you to have sex? Yes or no? Does your partner verbally abuse or disrespect you by calling you names, belittling you, or threatening you? Yes or no? Does your partner try to restrict whom you spend time with or limit your other choices in your life? Yes or no? Does your partner consistently assign unfounded malicious intent to your actions and opinions? Yes or no? Do you find yourself afraid of disagreeing with or opposing your partner? Yes or no? And does this relationship make you feel the way you did as a child? Yes or no? And do you feel dominated or controlled by your partner? Yes or no? And they said this is if you're in a personal relationship or a marriage with somebody, or just boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, whoever it is. They said scoring, if you answered yes to any of the above questions, you will need to determine whether your childhood abuse history is shaping your perceptions of your current relationship, or whether the relationship is in fact abusive in some way. Well, I would say, like they said here, recommendations, if you're being hit, forced to have sex, or criticized or verbally abused, you must take steps to stop this very real and potentially dangerous pattern. If you are being dominated in one or more destructive ways, you should seek professional help to figure out how to rectify or leave the relationship, or insist that your partner get help to eliminate the abusive behavior. In more subtle instances where you are unclear as to whether your perceptions of abuse are based on the past or on the present, you may also need professional help to understand fully the interpersonal dynamics that are being played out in your relationships. Again, your ASCA meeting co-secretaries might have local resource lists to help you find the assistance you need. Those are some serious questions that so many people that I knew growing up were going through a lot of that, if not most of it. And my mom actually was going through all of that. Um, my dad was abusing my mom in every way. My mom would have had to answer yes to all of those questions. And, that's horrific for anybody to do to another person. It's not okay. Like if you're being abused now and you're an adult, you're an adult and you're in an abusive relationship, you need to get help. You need to get support. And, you need to not allow anyone to treat you like that. It's not okay. And there's a lot of it going on, and most of it behind closed doors where people don't see. And this is not okay. You know, so that's why it's really important before even starting a healing journey as an abuse survivor or child abuse survivor. You have to get your life in a certain place, like I was saying a few videos back. We have to stabilize our life, our adult life now, so that we're not being abused. We're in a safe environment, and before we even take on something like trying to go through and work on our past issues and resolve past issues from the abuse as a child, because it's too much to try to do that as well as trying to survive in an unsafe situation right now as an adult. So that's why stabilizing your life is very important before you start a healing journey. And you want to make sure you have everything sort of in place so that once you do start working on your past issues, you're not going to fall apart. It's not, everything's not going to come crashing down, because you'll have support set up in places and you'll be in a safe environment. That's why it's so important, right? Because these things are very, very difficult for most people. Maybe there's people out some that have just, didn't have such a difficult time with their healing journey, but most of the survivors that I've run into is, in the past dealing with, ASCA, because I volunteer with the ASCA. I have the 4, now I've just started a group back up again. But, and also SIA, the different groups. Most of the survivors had very difficult time going through their healing journey, and especially at the beginning, when you're first starting it out, because it's so painful to revisit some of this past stuff and to work through it and deal with it. That's why many survivors won't. They don't want to do it because it's just too painful. It's just too hard. And I get that, because that's where I was until the age of like 44 when I started really working on it. At the age of 42, I started my healing journey, but I really didn't do any work on the looking at the painful past and going through and grieving my childhood and doing the grief work, doing the, assessing the abuse and really taking a look at it till 2009. And it was difficult. Absolutely it was. And then, it's, especially at first, I found it made me nervous to even talk about this stuff. I was just like, I wasn't afraid somebody was going to come after me or anything, because, my abusers are, dead and gone, and who's going to say what. The issue is like, just for me to have to deal with it, and to revisit that pain was, it's hard, right? And so you need to have this stuff all worked out first and be in a stable place in your life, before you start something like this. Very important. Get support. There is support out there, even for free. The ASCA, Adult Survivors of Child Abuse, a Moore Center program, that's free. You can join a group for free. It's absolutely free. It doesn't cost a dime. You just have to have an internet connection or a telephone or something. And the same with SIA. The SIA, Survivors of Incest Anonymous. That's free. You have to pay for some of their literature, but to join a group and actually belong to the group, it's absolutely free. There's a lot of those groups out there. Those are just the 2 that I trust, because they have a format. It's a safety. Everything is kind of safe for the survivor in the meeting, so I like those because it's very structured, and I just like that. But the thing is there's lots of different groups out there, and those aren't the only 2. And most of them, not all are free. Some of them do charge a fee. And some of them are quite expensive, and you have to have like government assistance to actually go through them because they're like, $200 a month, or if you don't have the money, it can be really expensive. Like some of those groups, but so those ones I just avoid because I don't want to pay. I don't want to have to pay money for what somebody did to me when I was a child. I think that's ridiculous that I should have to pay money for something that somebody did to me. I'm trying to heal, so I go for the free stuff because I'm like, there's no way I'm going to pitch out $200 a month to try to heal from something that from my past childhood abuse where it never should have happened in the first place. My abuser should be paying for that. But they're dead, so what are you going to do? It's like, they wouldn't have paid for it anyway. They were my abusers, right? They hated me. So all I'm saying, reach out and get some help. You know, if you are not in a safe place right now, you need to get yourself to a safe place. You need to have good people around you. Get some support, and you can even do this all anonymously, especially with this group support stuff. Nobody even has to know your name. Just the moderator of the group knows your name, because you contact them to become part of the group. But in the group, it's actually anonymous or first name only, and you don't have to use your real first name. You could have any first name. Nobody needs to know who you are, and that's the beauty of that, because there's safety in that, right, for a lot of people. And so you can just use a fake name and get support, right? Because lots of people use fake names and everybody knows it, and nobody cares because they're trying to help the individual person. They don't care if they're using a fake name or not. It's kind of like, doesn't matter, just reach out and get some help, right? And there are some of the groups have, people that you can call anytime of the day or night. I know NAASCA is one, the National Association of Adult Survivors of Child Abuse, NAASCA. They have a calling list of like 60, 70 people on that list. And, you can call that list. Let's say you just can't cope and you don't know who you need somebody to talk to, can't find anybody to talk to. You just call that list, keep calling until you reach somebody, because they've got their name on that list because they talk to survivors of abuse. And they try to help people find resources. And these are abuse survivors themselves giving back, to try to help people out. And that's just how good they are. I know a lot of them actually because I volunteered for NAASCA for a few years anyway. So, it's just important for you to reach out and not allow yourself to be abused, and get the support you need. Right? If you need a therapist or counselor, start looking into finding one. Start looking into finding some government resources that will help you to pay for that if you can't pay for it, and get some help. Definitely. We did not deserve this. And so it's just so important. Stabilizing their life. They said before recovery, many survivors live lives characterized by constant crisis. Job disappointments, relocations, failed relationships, and financial setbacks are among the hallmarks that may result from unresolved childhood abuse issues. And when I read that, I was like, absolutely, that's exactly what my problem was. Every single one of those. That was all me. Some of it still is. But the issue is it was just always a crisis, right? So of course, these things can be caused by other life stresses and problems as well. And the reasons for this are complex, but for many survivors, it comes down to an inability to build regularity, predictability, and consistency in one's life because of the ongoing internal chaos associated with the history of abuse. Many survivors find themselves functioning in crisis mode, responding with stopgap measures that do nothing to resolve the underlying issues. So as a result, each new crisis consumes precious energy and attention, and the task of resolving the underlying issues is ignored. So living life in a crisis mode is truly exhausting and dispiriting. After years, it can lead to discouragement, helplessness, and hopelessness. And that's how I grew up, because my parents lived like that, and that's how I grew up, and all of my siblings, and that's what we did. We just carried it right on. Everything, it was all unmanageable crisis. A horrible, horrible way to live. And so many people are doing it. And they don't know enough to even, that there's something better out there. And, you get used to that crisis mode. And sometimes that something better out there looks a little bit boring. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, no, but some people actually learn to actually love this stuff. And it's really, really tragic. I actually knew people like this who didn't want anything different but abuse and crisis, because that fed that it fed something, you know what I mean, within them to be in that, in always in that crisis and always in that trauma, addicted to the trauma, you know. And I kind of can relate a little bit to that in my teens because, you know, I grew up abused and then looked for and lived dangerously, like looking for danger, looking for extreme, you know, stuff as a teenager. And because it was exciting, but you know, I didn't realize there was something better out there, which is just a nice, normal, stable life apart from the abuse. And you know, loving people, caring people in my life. I'm caring, they're caring. You know, that's just so much better. I started to look for that in my 20s. But the thing is you know, so many people don't. They just continue living like that. That's why I mean I talk about all this stuff because you know two of my brothers continued that right on into their 30s and then killed themselves. And so you know it's horrible, absolutely horrible what people will do, and because they were abused as children, never should have happened in the first place, right? So it's just so it's sad. Sad way to live. I see people doing it now. Some of the stuff you see in the news, you see these young people living like that, and you got to wonder how they grew up, right? Because average normal people don't want to live like that, you know, drug addicted, you know, homelessness, and not because of the economy or because there's no jobs, it's because can't maintain uh, just a regular lifestyle, you know, and that's really hard. I had to learn how to do this, you know what I mean? And it's like, okay, if I want to keep a job, then I got to I'm gonna have to start you know, I'm gonna get off the drugs, and I'm gonna have to like start, you know, shaping up. You know, it was like I had to completely learn how to do all this because I wasn't taught any of it, right? And that's the issue, right? So many people aren't, and then they don't know to actually that there is something better out there, and that's the problem, and that's sad, right? So they said trying to initiate and proceed with recovery when your daily life is so unstable is a setup for failure. Recovery really is possible, but unlikely to occur until the various crises raging in your life have been settled. So a key component of your safety first plan will be to identify and start to stabilize the problem areas in your life before embarking on your recovery. It's not necessary to fully resolve these problems, because that will come as you work through recovery. But successful recovery depends on you're taking steps to bring some order to your life. And in so doing, you will reduce the frequency of crisis and thereby increase the amount of time and energy you can devote to your recovery. So the following checklist will help you identify and rank the issues that may be diverting energy from your recovery efforts. So this is Crisis Hotspots checklist. It's on page 28. And when I had to go through when I first started doing this manual, go through and answer these things honestly, and that's the only way it works is if we're honest with ourselves. And so when answering the questions, I mean, I'd go through and I'd literally check them off. So crisis hotspots checklist: check yes or no for each area of your life, and then rate the level of the problem on a scale from 1, not a problem, to 10, very much a problem, for yes answers. So number 1 is relationships. Are my relationships a crisis issue? Or number 2 is finances. Number 3, parenting. Number 4, job. Number 5, housing. Number 6, psychological or emotional state. Number 7, family relations. Number 8, addictions. Number 9, health problems. Number 10, legal problems. And they said count the number of yes answers and then rank them from the highest, which are the most problematic, to the lowest, least problematic. So, I did all that before. And I mean, you know, it's just depends on where you're at, and in your life. And sometimes we may score high in all of those, and then all of that would be very problematic. It's like, we need to get stabilized. Right now with COVID-19, I think most people are struggling, for in all sorts of ways. So the answers would be probably, I'd say, even worse now because of COVID-19 last year, threw everybody off. And I think that most people would be, a lot of people lost their jobs. I know I did. Um, can't find a job because there's not enough out there. So the finances thing is an issue for me right now. But that's not because I was abused as a child. It's just the economy, right? So this is where we got to kind of look at certain things like that. I don't, because I don't have a job now. I'm not That's not a crisis because I was abused as a child. There's a few jobs out there. There's just so many people looking. Just in my city alone, there's 60,000 people looking for work right now, and there's only like I don't know, 3,000 jobs. So your chances of getting one, unless you have a degree or something, is pretty slim. And even for restaurant stuff, to just go and cook at a restaurant, I think they want you to have a bachelor degree or something. Because right now, they got the employers have the pick of the stock, because there's more people looking for work. They're not struggling to find people. So now they're looking for people that have really major qualifications. So regular people like me, it's a little bit difficult, and I'm older too, so that's also a problem, right? And so finances right now, I mean, job and stuff is really because of COVID-19, not because of my past. But when I first answered these, back in 2009, 2010, when I was going through this, I scored these. The scores would have been different, and than they are now for me, right? I know when I first started doing this crisis hotspots checklist, relationships was a problem in my life. Finances were a problem. I've always had financial difficulty. Parenting, I never had children, so parenting is not an issue for me. Um, jobs never really been an issue for me as long as I can keep one. That's the thing. I've always been able to maintain a job, which I'm very thankful. And you know, I did one time I did get fired, but I really didn't take that seriously because I didn't like the people anyway, and they were just rude, and I was like, whatever, goodbye. Otherwise, I've been able to hold jobs down for like 10 years, the same job sort of thing, longevity. So job's not an issue for me in my life, but for some people it is. My brothers could never keep a job, and housing, that's always a problem for most people, I think, unless you just have money and somehow learned how to do things properly and got a house and bought one. A lot of people are struggling with housing. Excuse me, I have a cold. So psychological or emotional state, that's what I say, that's a hot spot. It was when I first started doing this workbook, and now it's not. Family relations have always been a crisis for me. I resolved that by cutting all my family off, so now it's not. It was because I try to maintain a relationship with a couple of my family members who are still living. There's very few, and we're together too toxic. Can't be around each other. Unfortunately, it's too bad, but that's just the way it is. So I cut them off because I'm like, I don't need that in my life. I really don't. I'm on my healing journey. They even said, my sister was like, I wish I could be on my healing journey too. And I'm like, well, you could. You just have to go get on it. You have to just start it. So hopefully she did. I don't know whether she's done that or not. Addictions, always a problem for me. Health problems, definitely. Legal problems, no, thankfully. But even back in the old days, I didn't have legal problems. But health problems, yes. Addictions problems, yes. So I scored, pretty high on this list for crisis stuff, right? And then I went through and I rated, whether it was really problematic or, not so problematic, right? And that's how we can sort of assess what's the crisis hotspots in our life, right? Recommendations. Your long-term goal is to stabilize as many of your problem areas as you can, but you should start with the 3 highest ranking problems on the checklist, or those you believe that cause the greatest instability in your life. Focus on each of these 3 key problem areas and try to determine how you might stabilize each over the long term. It may take some time and thought to come up with the truly valuable ideas, but unless you start this process, you're likely to delay your recovery and continue to operate in crisis mode. So they have a little section here, for hotspots. You can write what it was and then the things that you can try. It's just like a little workbook. And that's just the issue. Some of this stuff just takes a long time to work through, and especially, relationship type stuff. That's not easy. Trying to resolve, stuff with people is always difficult and can take time. This stuff can't be done overnight. It's not something you can just, like, I wish we could just snap our fingers and just, it's all taken care of. I'm now a millionaire. I'm sitting in my mansion and all my relationships are perfect and I don't need to work because I'm a millionaire. It's just not that easy. It takes time to do this stuff. And so, we just got to slowly work at getting these things taken care of. And that's what I do, is just sort of one step at a time. I don't cram too much all at once, trying to take care of too many things all at once. And, that way I'm not overloading myself, because you don't want to do that. and just, slowly kind of get these things sort of in the best position that we can. It's not, we can't always just run out and get a job. That's the issue. We can't always just fix a relationship issue that's going on. It takes time and a lot of work. So, but that's what I always say. Just make sure you're not being abused and that no one's abusing you in your life. Not that's not okay. I mean, as children, we couldn't protect ourselves. There's nothing we could do. But the issue is, as an adult, we can make those decisions. We don't have to ever allow anybody to abuse us again. You need to make that. You need to make a good choice for yourself. So they said if you find that you have high scores in more than three problem areas, try to identify the top three and focus your efforts on these areas first. If you try to tackle them all at once, it's easy to get overwhelmed by the volume and scope of the problem areas. So if you can isolate three key areas and focus on how to go about resolving them, you will gain a sense of accomplishment and mastery that will help you to identify the next group of hotspots and so on until you've been able to address all the issues that are of concern to you. If you can't do these exercises or find that you just can't implement them in your life, then you will need some help to focus your efforts. Think about seeing a therapist or talking to someone who you believe has resolved the issues in his or her own life. Try to grasp what it is that holds you back from making the necessary changes to stabilize your life. So it is just so important. Right? We're going to look at self-soothing activities. So one of the most important skills for survivors to learn is how to self-soothe themselves emotionally. Most survivors never learn to self-soothe in childhood because parents who abuse are often poor at soothing themselves, and consequently at teaching their children to self-soothe. However, it is essential to your recovery that you develop some capacity for self-soothing early on in your recovery journey. You will need this skill as you proceed through the various stages of recovery. And soothing is what good parents do when their children are upset. It often involves soothing touch that is warm and comforting. It can involve words that are reassuring, empathetic, and helpful. Hopeful. It may involve activities that are physically, intellectually, or sensorially nourishing, such as taking a walk, reading a favorite book, or sharing a special meal. It can also involve daily practices that are spiritually uplifting and inspiring, such as meditation. When you can perform this type of caring for yourself, whatever your chosen activities may be, then have learned to self-soothe. And you probably have your own list of self-soothing strategies. Some may be healthier than others. You will need to evaluate how to soothe yourself so you can retain the healthy practices and try to eliminate or control the less healthy ones. And then you will need to add some new strategies that can provide extra comfort during your most emotionally challenging times in recovery. And that's the purpose for self-soothing. If we don't know how to do it, and we're working through some of this stuff in this workbook, and it's just becomes, too much, and all of a sudden, I'm triggered, let's say, and it's too upsetting for me to deal with. And if I don't know how to self-soothe, it's going to be difficult to get through those moments. You know, it's important to know what works for you. Some people will journal. Some people will listen to music. Some people go for a walk. Just get out into nature, go to a park and walk around and get some sunshine or whatever. Just different things that people will do. And whatever works for you, we all have to find what works for us. And that way, if we're having a hard time coping because we're going, you're on your healing journey and all of a sudden you're triggered and you're having a bad day and it's a bit of a, maybe not so much a crisis, but just being triggered and having to deal with that stuff. You need to know how to self-soothe. And for me, most of my stuff is meditation. I do a lot of sort of meditative type things. Not yoga or anything like that, but for some people, yoga works. And, other people, it's just breathing techniques. I know for myself, I'm learning how to do breathing techniques. It does help. I don't do as much as I should. A friend of mine is like, you need to do breathing work. I'm like, I know. And I still need to go through and do some breathing. And I've been working, well, I did a little bit, but then I put it off. See, so I got to go back and do some more of that. Some people just like to read a good book, their favorite book, watch their favorite movie, whatever. Something that makes you feel good. So that, you can kind of not push down what that trigger or push it away. But just to know that I'm in the present, I'm in the here and now. I'm not being abused. I'm looking at past childhood abuses, which are in the past, and I'm in the here and now. And we can start to calm ourselves down, do something that we enjoy doing, or self-soothing, and be good to ourselves. It's just really important. So, you find what works for you, right? Some people like to exercise, they'll go out for a jog or a run, or, do some gym work or whatever, lift weights, just whatever works for you. And so we can write these down, the ways I soothe myself today, and they just give you a space to write that down. New ways I might soothe myself: one, like exercise; two, practice meditation, guided imagery, or deep relaxation; three, write in my journal; four, do a spiritual practice; five, take a warm bath. Just anything like that. For some people, like I said, some people will, some of those things would work for, and then others they wouldn't. And so that's why it's just really important that you find something that works for you, right? Because not all of it's going to work for everybody. And they're just making suggestions. There's no, they're just making suggestions. So that's why you find your own, right? What works for you. Some people like music. For me, music's very important to me, and depends on what kind of a day I'm having to what kind of music I listen to. And so it does help me to get through a lot of things, music. And I'm learning how to play guitar, which I really enjoy. I've always kind of been wanting to do that. As a young person, I did try to learn guitar. I wasn't very good at it, but now I'm about 3 years in, and I'm actually getting to the point where I'm starting to be able to play songs and stuff. But I just enjoy it. I enjoy the sound of the music. It's not so much, I don't want to be like a famous guitar player. I enjoy the strings, and I love strings, like piano, violin, any of the stringed instruments. And I love the strings, and I'm just more into the guitar than I am like the piano. But any of the stringed instruments, the sound just hits my ear, and it helps me to relax. And I just love like guitar music. So, that's kind of what I'm learning, not classical, but I do actually enjoy listening to some classical. But it's whatever you like. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm saying. We're all different. What works for me won't work for somebody else, and what works for them won't work for me. So we have to find out what's going to work for us. Living safety first, a final note. So this is on page 33. They said the goal of this chapter is to encourage you to develop a daily practice of living safety first. So in any situation with any people facing all kinds of choices or decisions, you always want to start with your safety first plan, both to evaluate potential dangers and to identify useful and appropriate coping mechanisms for the situation. The more you can incorporate your safety first plan into your life, the more you will eliminate the kinds of setbacks that plague so many survivors. And that probably plagued you as well. They've got in parentheses there. They said you can then focus your energy on creative recovery efforts and reduce self-sabotaging behavior. In so doing, you will begin to exercise the stability that is so essential for healthy functioning. He said you can carry elements of your safety first plan into your involvement with the ASCA. Should you ever feel overwhelmed or triggered by what you're hearing in a meeting, you will have a range of options at your disposal. Instead of listening to what is being said, you can direct your focus to your personal reaction and determine why you're having that particular reaction. So if your feelings are overwhelming, you can always leave the meeting. You can raise your hand and ask the co-secretaries to ask for volunteers to go outside and sit or talk with you. You can decide not to attend meetings on days you feel especially vulnerable, which is really important. You got to decide if you're safe enough to do the meeting or to do the work in the workbook here. They said you can discuss your reactions to meetings or shares with other ASCA participants or even the co-secretaries. And of course, you can discuss your reactions with members of your support network to determine if it is still helpful for you to attend ASCA meetings. Any or all of these strategies might be part of your safety first plan, along with many other options you have identified for yourself. So whatever your safety first plan, it is important that you adopt it as part of your daily life. The more you do this, the more you will internalize a sense of safety that non-survivors take for granted. And from this foundation of safety first, your recovery can proceed, bringing with it the development of a new self capable of creating the kind of life you longed for. That's awesome. So that's the safety first section. It's huge. We're on page 35, chapter 3, that's assessing child abuse introduction. And so, yeah, that safety first is very important. So the ASCA, they make a big deal about it, but it is very, very important. And some of those meetings that I've been to, I don't really get triggered listening to other people's stories, like other survivor stories. Some of it bothers me, and it makes me, or feelings of emotion that would come up would be anger, and things like that, or just sadness for them that they had to go through that, and that they suffered that. So mostly that's my, but I don't so much get triggered and you know can't cope sort of thing by hearing other survivor stories, but I know people who do, and that's why it's just so important. You have to know where you're currently, how you're feeling. Are you feeling safe enough to start a healing journey? And or should you maybe see a therapist or a counselor first to make sure to have somebody to help you determine that? Right? This is just so important, right? There's no doubt about it. Safety first. That's why they make a big deal about it. But that's what I think it is important, because like I've talked to a lot of survivors over the last like 12 years or so, and there are I've met many survivors who have gone into crisis, because they were addressing things that they weren't ready to address. And then, they have a horrible day and they have to try to get a hold of their therapist. And, if you don't even have a therapist, what are you going to do if you come up against something like that you didn't even realize was going to trigger you, and then all of a sudden you're in crisis mode. Let's say nobody around can help you. What are you going to do? You need to have all this stuff set up first, so that you've got your support list of people you can call. If you need a counselor, therapist, you've got one. And this way, if you're having a hard time, you can schedule, a session with them, to make sure they can help you get through this stuff. Right? It's just so important. So safety first. I love that, and that's the end of that. So chapter 3 is assessing child abuse, and that's page 35. And that's just talking about like child abuse. What is child abuse? They go through and they talk about it, and then they ask the questions. And these questions, I mean, they're heavy duty. I know when I first started, these are what this book is what they use for this. The like part like if you do a step meeting, they would use this book. Otherwise, they don't use this book in the group. The ASC is ASCA groups. Like I just started one myself. I got it going again, and we would not use this book would not be used unless we decided to do a topical meeting and actually use this book in the topical meeting, because the meetings are set up, it's more of a share type thing, and it's all formatted so you can share. Some are open share, and then there's some that you can do that are like I said, topical. So there's also there's another type, I forget what it is. Open share, topical. There's 3 different types of meetings anyway. But the ones that I've been to mostly are the ones where it's just open share, and you just share when it's your turn. You can, or you can pass if you don't feel like sharing. Nobody has to talk. It's just up to you if you want to talk. But in an open share, I could just share with the group that day whatever I had probably most recently been dealing with, looking at the abuse from my past, or what's happening in my adult life that's because of the abuse that I suffered. And it helps to share. The people then in turn are not allowed to psychoanalyze or anything like that. It's all done in a very specific way. What it does is just allows you a safe place to share that information. And all those groups, everything said in those groups is confidential. And so, it's a safe place you can go and just share and get it off, get it out, and I find it very, very helpful just to be able to have that support. And so those groups are awesome. But the Survivor to Thriver manual, it's a good workbook. But it does ask some very serious questions. And if you're looking at that stuff and you're not prepared, like you haven't done the safety first stuff and you don't know whether you'd be safe enough to look at that stuff, you could be triggered, and could cause you to go backwards in your healing journey. So you just definitely don't want that. So they do talk about sexual abuse, child physical abuse, and I mean this information's out there. You can get it online. But the questions that they ask are the are what really can cause people to be triggered. Because when they're asking you to write down, or if you're working through this with somebody else, to, just, to sort of admit that this stuff happened. And I think many survivors of abuse, if they haven't done that before, it can cause some serious emotions to come to the surface that a person wasn't used to dealing with. And it's hard. It is. I know, because I was there like back in 2009. I've come a long way. Like I said, I've been on my healing journey for a long time looking at this stuff. So I'm okay to look at it, but that's why I'm saying you have to be very, very careful, especially when you're dealing with your own stuff, because it is so painful, right? And so we'll pick up that. I guess we could start the first part of that. And we won't be able to get too far. We've only got about 10 minutes here. So what is child abuse? Okay, well, first of all, introduction. The next step in your recovery journey is learning some general definitions and statistics about 3 types of child abuse. It is important to know this in order to compare your own experience with what is generally known about child abuse. A critical part of recovering from child abuse is learning to distinguish what really happened to you and whether it was constituted child abuse. In this next section, we will be facing the reality of child abuse frankly. The purpose of this review is not to deny the past, but to illuminate it, not to indict your parents or abusers, but to hold them responsible. And finally, not to blame yourself, but to develop a new understanding of your experience. Your ability to understand the complexity of factors involved in your abuse will serve you well in making the past less overwhelming and threatening. So reading this may be painful for you, and you may not want to proceed until you feel prepared to experience whatever feelings may surface. So they said you may want to read this chapter in sections, allowing yourself plenty of time to digest each one before moving on. And you can read it with a friend and discuss your reactions with members of your support network, ASCA, or a therapist. And remember that you are an adult now, but the feelings that come up may be those of a child. The section on child abuse is followed by a general discussion of some of the ways in which child abuse can impact survivors' adult lives. And you probably will recognize many of the behavioral patterns described in this section. And since you are already involved in the recovery process, meant to highlight some of the key problem areas, the discussion is far from comprehensive. And you should remember that persons who are not abused may have the same behaviors and problems. So in other words, difficulties in adult life can be caused by a number of environmental and social factors, only one of which is child abuse. So they say, what is child abuse? Child abuse is generally defined as any act of omission or commission that endangers or impairs a child's physical or emotional health and development, and is usually broken into 3 subcategories: physical, sexual, and emotional. So the first section, physical abuse. So we've got about 7 minutes. Physical abuse. They say physical abuse is defined as any physical act committed against a child which results in a non-accidental injury. Examples of physical abuse include severe hitting, slapping, biting, cutting, pushing, poking, burning, twisting, shaking, choking, punching, pinching, squeezing, whipping, kicking, pulling of the hair, legs, or arms, and dunking in water. I mean, all that stuff is child abuse. This is page 36 if you wanted to read it. Bodily signs that may indicate physical abuse include bruises, burns, bites, marks, welts, skin punctures, cuts, abrasions, bleeding, broken bones, spiral fractures, tearing of the skin, internal hemorrhaging, and loss of hair. Most, if not all, of these physical signs may also be the result of other natural causes not related to child abuse. So it's extremely important that you keep this in mind, both while assessing what happened to you and in any instance in which you observe such bodily signs on another person, child or adult. So behavioral signs that may indicate physical abuse include extreme vigilance, fearfulness, scanning the environment for perceived threats, flinching in a self-protective way, either avoidance or unusually quick attachment to people, hostile or aggressive behavior, self-destructive behavior, such as walking in front of cars or falling out of windows, and other directed destructive behaviors such as setting fires and maiming or killing animals. While we believe that persons exhibiting any of these behavioral signs is likely to have some history of abuse, we can caution you not to assume automatically that child abuse is the cause of such behaviors. It's just normally that's sort of what they've noted over the years studying this stuff. It doesn't always mean that, if you see somebody doing something like that, that they were abused, but it's just that it's actually quite common. And so let's see, what do we have? We have about 5 minutes left. We won't have time to go too much into this rest of this article. This is more of a history here: the assault, abandonment, killing of children. Yeah, this is terrible. This is why I keep doing what I'm doing. And really, the issue is I'm actually volunteering with AU4H, Advocates United for Humanity, and my two sister advocates, Donna Shear, Lee Roberts. We've been working to stop and prevent child abuse together, doing what we could, what we can with what we have to make noise and share awareness and spread the word. Child abuse is a crime. It's against the law. It needs to stop. Children are dying. Um, you know, that's not all we do, but that's a big part of what we do. And we've been working at this since like 2010. And this, I'll always be doing that. I'll always be out here speaking out against abuse and standing up for children's rights. And it's just so important because abuse is wrong, and yet we see children ended up in the morgue. Basically, that's when you see, these headlines that roll out. Um, you know, that's when you see it, is when the child's been killed. Those are the only ones. Those are only the ones that are being reported. The rest of it's not even being reported. The rest of it is just going on behind closed doors, and the child is being abused. And if they survive, they then have to pick up the pieces later, as like in my instance, you know what I mean? So it's so not okay if you're a survivor of abuse, what happened to you. And you did not deserve that. No child does. There's no excuse for abuse. We basically, have looked at child abuse over the years, studying this stuff out, working with Dream Catchers for Abused Children for a couple of years, and then, other groups, NASCA, and their own AU4H, Advocates United for Humanity. And really, basically, anything that hurts and harms a child that's done on purpose, that's an intent to hurt or harm a child, and that's abuse. And so, whether it's physical, emotional, psychological, sexual abuse of any type is a crime against children. Sexual abuse of anybody as an adult is a crime. People should just automatically know this, but some people don't. So what happened to us is not okay. And, it was never our fault. It was never our fault. It's never the child's fault. Just so everybody knows that. So important. We did not deserve that. And that's why I'm hoping, that people, I just wanted to be one more voice, like I said, with all the other voices out here. And, it was never about trying to gain popularity and trying to be famous and all of this stuff. And, I wrote my books because I needed to unload that, and I wanted people to know what happened to my brothers, mainly, and to my family. But it was mainly about my brothers because everybody just thought they were such losers and, such thugs and drug addicted, this and that. And I'm like, you have no idea where they came from. And that's why I wrote my books. I'm like, you want to know where they came from? I'll tell you where they came from. I blame my parents. I absolutely do. I don't blame CPS for not removing this from the home. I don't blame the government. I don't blame teachers. I blame my parents, my abusers. So I put the blame on the abusers. That's where the blame should go. So, none of us deserve that. And if you were abused as a child, you didn't deserve that either. So I just wish you, all the best. If you're having a hard time and you can't cope and you're struggling, you need to make the best choice for yourself, and that is to call a crisis line. Yep, call a crisis line. Even if it's anonymously, get some help. Do not suffer on your own. Do not allow yourself to be destroyed by what somebody else did to us as children. No, you need to get help. You need to have a good life, and you need to have the support that you so deserve. So do I, right? So take good care of yourselves till the next time. Talk to you soon.